up, man.
Go get it.
All right. Can you hear me? We
Hey,
good?
everybody.
Fix Healthcare Live. Let me hear it. How y'all doing? All right. Wow. Well, what an amazing keynote, Brandon. Thank you so much. Shout out to Nava for just coordinating this event, inviting us to be a part of this. We have an amazing panel lined up, and we have a little bit of time, and there's a lot that I want to squeeze in. So we're going to go as quickly as we can. But where I want to start is, I think the keynote teed this up perfectly. There is no playbook for what's happening right now. It's not just that the old playbooks aren't working. It's become increasingly apparent to us at the Modern People Leader, to our friends and community, to probably y'all, that there's no silver bullet for how we're going to get to the future, what the future is going to look like. And so I have the privilege as the co-host of the Modern People Leader. If you're not familiar with MPL, we interview 1 to 2 CHROs, Chief People Officers, a week. And so talking to HR leaders is what we do. And so I'm so excited to share. We have 2 amazing leaders in the conversation today to talk about, this feeling, this heaviness that I think we're all carrying as HR leaders. Like the stakes are high. CFOs, CEOs are increasingly wanting HR to have answers around, what is the future going to look like? What is work going to look like? What is the company going to look like? And there are not a lot of answers. And, the one thing that is clear at the MPL for us is that the rate at which expectations and pressure is increasing is outpacing the pace at which the playbooks are being rewritten. And that's a big gap. And I think it's a gap that is leaving a lot of HR leaders feeling stressed, feeling uncertain, feeling some fear about what the future may look like. And so I want to unpack that today. In the 23 minutes we have left, I want to unpack that. And so, Cara, Jevan, I'm so excited to have y'all today. Cara, you are, the founder and leader of one of the most trusted HR communities. You've also been the head of HR, Chief People Officer at Amazing Brands, most recently at Lattice. So you bring an amazing vantage point to this conversation. Jevan, you have an amazing story background as well. And you're having to find answers and leading through some of the things we're talking about real time, like in your job today. So I think you're also going to bring a great perspective. And so there's a lot to cover. Are you cool if we just jump in?
Jump
All
in.
right. So, Cara, I want to start with you. So what the hell is going on with HR right now? No, seriously. What is actually working for HR leaders? For those, and you have, if you are from, many of you are probably part of People Tech Partners, but it is, 400 to 500, 500?
600.
600, wow. So based on the conversations y'all are having in your community, what are you finding that is working the best for HR leaders?
Well, I think first is just to recognize that we're at a true moment of transformation, not just within our organizations, with what's happening with AI, what's happening with global economic scenarios, as well as political. We are at a moment in time where the role of us as people leaders with a capital P is really transforming. And I think you previewed a little bit of what that is. And some of that is understanding that the expectations of the workforce has really shifted. And that started 5-6 years ago with COVID, and people started understanding and seeing their employer in a different role. When the whole world changed around us, the one anchor that many people had was work. So we became even more the center of people's lives and came into people's homes in a very different way. I think in partnered with that was this understanding, wow, health and the safety of my family related to disease just became a very different narrative in people's lives. And I remember some of the initial phone calls that I would get from employees or conversations that I would have online were much more focused on people wanting to be educated about what their insurance plan covered, what happens if their husband gets sick with COVID, what happens if their child gets sick with COVID. Many people who had never even engaged with the health the health insurance or health industry before were starting to really realize this was front and center and how important it was to them. Then fast forward to where we are today, I think that awareness and understanding and the belief that, wow, my work is this critical, and work paired with health is so central to my family. It became truly an emotional connection that maybe was more of a transactional connection before that. So we began understanding that this relationship and this inherent contract that we had with our employees connected to healthcare, whether honestly we as people leaders wanted that to be the case in the United States or not, we were the ones that were carrying that burden. So I think that was number one. I think number two is the so that's tough. That's really tough for our jobs in this world of transition around so many other components of our work as people leaders. So that, to me, I put in the this is difficult, and then compound that with cost that's happening year over year over year. So you have this tension between wanting to deliver more for your employees, having your employees value this component that much more, while you're also having pressure from the business that you can't keep spending money like you did before. And we have to potentially pull back on some of these or do a remix. So I think that's the tough part of the job. I think the optimism that I have is we do have new thinkers, we have innovation, we have new products, and we have new technology that can solve many of these problems. The challenge is how do we put that together strategically, and that's what people are talking about. They're talking about how are you doing this in a way that is inherently human and truly serving the wants and needs of your employees, while you're also able to deliver for the business and deliver professionally, which is just a reality of being a CPO and having this go from third or fourth or fifth on your list and something you worried about come July to something that's now number 2, number 3 on your list, and something that you have to deeply be involved in from a strategic perspective.
That feels like a balancing on a tightrope, like an impossible thing to kind of keep balances. So Jevan, being in the role, what that Cara just shared resonates with you? And what y'all are experiencing?
Thank you, Jevan.
I guess what I would also add is, which is implicit, but I'll make it explicit,
Please.
is, when Cara described where we were in 2020 and the few years thereafter, we were also in still an employee-powered market, right? An employee-centric market. And I think we would largely say that is no longer the case. It's interesting for me because my company is still in full-on talent war, probably about as bad as I've ever seen it. And yet many of my friends in tech are actively worried about their jobs. So it's a very interesting kind of bifurcation. But the pressure on chief people officers to still deliver an incredible outcome for the organization, but to be in this position all of a sudden where there's distrust from the employee base, are we all dispensable and this is kind of just a holding pattern until we're all automated out? There is pressure from boards and the rest of the executive team to focus much more on efficiency and so on. And then most of us got into this business not to get rid of people, but to help people succeed. And so how do you sort of take all of those things and balance them on the tightrope, as you mentioned?
And so sticking with you, Jevan, when you think about the head of HR role, even 18 months ago, what are some of the key differences today, some of the things that you're expected to lead or to be taking on for the organization that just weren't there 18 months ago?
So I'm a big believer that major revolutionary changes don't necessarily introduce totally new variables, but simply amplify what you saw before, right? And so I was thinking about this coming into the conversation. Cara and I were on a panel, I think 18 to 24 months ago, and one of the things that we talked about was how the best chief people officers were starting to look more like COOs, right? The way that they were really thinking about their roles and driving effectiveness across the organization, of course, through all the typical people sub-functions, but increasingly with an acumen and even an operational ownership around execution across the organization, and seeing some of our CPO peers actually move into these blended roles and so on. And what what's happening. You're seeing even more of that, right? I still think it's a micro trend, which is a whole other conversation we can get into. But having people have more responsibility for technology or more operating responsibility for different pieces, and so that focus on business acumen, that focus on operating acumen, I think has just continued to climb, and so that pressure is not brand new, but I think the pressure is more acute and more existential than it's ever been.
Yeah, just reflect. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to that. What's also interesting to me, Jevan, and I think it's fair for me to say this in this room, is we are changing a lot in our role, and the expectations of our role are changing, and people are navigating that from a career perspective. And I do think the stakes are existentially higher for us from a business standpoint. I think the system is well behind us. And I'll tell you what we're being asked to do. The great CPOs that are moving into that role and having the career longevity and the people stepping forward are the folks talking about it from a business perspective and expecting that from the ecosystem in which we're working, looking for benefits brokers and providers to have evolved and not just send an Excel spreadsheet back and forth like we did 5 years ago, right? We're looking for new innovation, expecting that from benefits partners, expecting and needing these new solutions because we're being called to account by literally our board of directors. Do you know how many times I never had a board member in my 25 years as being a CPO say a thing about healthcare? Pretty much 23 years of that until recent years when they're being told, boards of directors are being told because it's a chunk of what we're doing. And what we need and want are people who can step up and help us step into those new roles. But we're also seeing people fall down, traditional organizations not be able to keep up with sort of where things are going. And I say that in that everything's changing. So we're talking about the CPO role, but we're also talking about two systems that are colliding that used to pretty much be on sort of the standard annual cadence and everything was sort of figured out.
And I want to come back to that in a second. I want to tie back to something that Brandon shared in the keynote, 90% plus increase in AI capability. That is like insane. And so I don't know most of y'all, but I've been 20 years in HR. The first half of that I spent as a practitioner. The second half I've been an entrepreneur targeting HR. I've had a services company, a SaaS company, and now a media company. I've learned to do a lot of things outside of HR where I started my career journey. I've learned to do sales. I've learned to do client success. The one thing I could never do, and I always had to hire, were engineers. I am a non-technical person. And this quarter at Modern People Leader, I've become our chief technology officer, CTO,
Congrats.
non-technical person. And it's insane. I'm managing teams of AI engineers and managing multiple sprints. And I'm actually having a blast doing it. But that is and I can attest to that slide that Brandon shared, that 90% plus increase. And so when we think about that power harnessed by HR, what does it mean to the future of HR leadership? And for the record, we're 18 minutes in and I'm just now going off track. So I've taken it easy. But yeah, like just with that in mind, like how does that impact, the future of what we do, of this beautiful space we operate in?
Oh my gosh, where do we begin? There's so much to your point before where we were it's such a terrible metaphor, but the red-headed stepchildren is kind of what do they say?
Not wrong.
I love redheads, but we were always like back of the line, right? You sort of say, oh, can we get some help from internal developers and so on? You're like, well, we need to focus on the customer and this and that, and you're like, well, I guess that makes sense, and I guess we'll never get any support whatsoever. And now all of a sudden, having the ability for your own team to build and to have all of that capacity and potential unleashed feels really limitless. What I think is interesting, so we had a company all hands earlier today. Actually, just for context, for those in the room don't know where I'm coming from. So I'm Chief People Officer at Writer. We're an agentic AI platform selling to large enterprise firms, so very large, complex Fortune 500 type folks. And we had a customer testimonial this morning where someone from a very, very, very well-known company that you would know was having an open conversation with our CEO that she was recapping and saying, you know, what's the dynamic internally? Because now because you have these tools that allow anyone to code and do all these things, in theory, the capacity for your internal IT has also further unleashed, right? What are they saying to you around, you know, why would you go with an external platform like Writer? We can just kind of do it all inside. And they said the capacity to build has increased, but the capacity for judgment and expertise is still limited, right? And what we are investing in with you is expertise. And I say this because when I think about a partner like Nava, who I had the pleasure, looking at you, Rick, partnering with at my last company, in Citro, and I think about the superpowering of judgment and expertise. I don't think that is obviated completely by what we are seeing today. And that is just, you know, to sort of press upon you all where differentiation will continue to be. Because the capacity to go tinker and create will be democratized, but you have to know what to create and why. You have to know what to build and prioritize. You have to know where the biggest leverage and ROI points are. And, you know, no matter how many amazing peers that we have, we are all limited human beings that have only so much time and only so much road that we've traveled, and so things that we don't know and so on. And so I think the other big difference, you know, when I think about when we were in this 10 years ago prior, is it used to be the journey was, okay, get in there, start building, and as you scale, you kind of build a small army of experts, and that army increases, and it's somewhat linear with scale, and that's life, right? And I think what I've increasingly done as a chief people officer is said, actually, that's not true. If I can have best-in-class partners, I don't necessarily want it all in-house. I want to keep leaning on and pressuring my expert friends to bring it to me, right? Because then it's high leverage, just in time. They have the benefit of seeing so much outside the organization's walls than I can.
Cara, anything to add?
Yes, and I think what we're also seeing with AI and the technology, but AI is still technology, but it's technology designed for human usage, which is very nice. It democratizes that component, and it allows for expanded intelligence in that sense. And so what I'm agreeing with is that, yes, we need these partners. The other piece I'm seeing is we need systems that in between those partner engagements allows those judgments, those decisions to then be executed by anyone within your organization. And that's how you get your true leverage, right? So it's not Jevan and Rick. Is it Rick? It's not Jevan and Rick, you know, talking and then great. It's Jevan and Rick talking and then having a system that can implement an employee experience at scale that then executes against some of those design decisions that you've made 6 months ago in a real way. Because fundamentally, what we've seen historically when benefits don't work within an organization, when we see some of those horrible stories, is a disconnect between the people who have the real knowledge and the leadership capability to get to a positive outcome, be filtered out through a system that doesn't work for people, right? So that final choices by the time it gets to the important decision point are not connected to the true intelligence and judgment that we believe it should be. And then in retrospect, we see these mistakes. I do think the benefit of having AI systems or agentic systems that can take this genius fundamentally between two people that have the discretion and filter it through an entire organization at whatever scale is really the power of this. And I think our role as chief people officers is really making sure that those decisions that are made with those folks that have real judgment are made effectively, and then that we are systematizing those effectively at scale.
That's like a podcast all in its own right there. We wish we had more time. I was told we can't go too far over our allotment. So I'm going to keep us moving because I want to go back to another thing that Brandon mentioned in the keynote, and that is the notion that HR leaders are the buyer of healthcare. And what was it? 150 million lives that healthcare is being provided for. That's an insane stat. And so I'm just curious what the two of you think about that notion.
Go ahead, Jevan.
I'm wrestling with my own commentary on the U.S. healthcare system.
Yeah.
Just trying to answer the question.
How far down do you want us to go?
You've got 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I fully accept Brandon's proposition, even if I disagree with it philosophically, that it should exist. And I would say, honestly, as Chief People Officer, some of the moments where I feel the deepest sense of responsibility is defining benefits. Right? Because I say to my team, the litmus test is think about who we are going to be saying no to. That doesn't mean we can say yes to everything, right? But the litmus test is you know that we are going to have a very uncomfortable conversation that ends with a no. And are you prepared for that? And why? What is the logic behind that? So it is a deep responsibility, and as Cara brought up, I think it's increasingly a board level conversation.
Anything to add?
I think what we know is it's always required a ton of trust with our benefits partners. I think the stakes have grown exponentially and continue to do that. I think with a couple things that are happening with the exponential shift in cost, huge. So we are being asked to make some more difficult decisions than we may have had to a few years ago, which require really strong judgment and deep understanding of what the choices actually are and what they aren't. I think the second piece is understanding the innovation that's coming to the market and the speed at which things are changing on the healthcare side. And that's what I'm hearing a ton more from CPOs. It's who are the providers that are new, that are providing innovation, that are providing solutions, and the want and need and desire from CPOs to have partners that are able to bring that to the table, because we know that we can't keep going the way we were going, and we have to find new ways of doing things, and we need people that are ready to do that with us. And I know this at every scale, like large enterprise especially, because change is here, and the only way we're going to navigate it is by looking at what's new. And then I think the third piece is really understanding where we are ourselves as leaders and knowing this is always a hard part of a CPO's role, but there is an integrity and an ethical component to this because it's people's lives. And there are some things in our day-to-day where we can sit back and say, business will make the choice. We don't get to do that with healthcare. Right? So we are working a lot, I think, within our networks and understanding each other and really asking what are other people doing. And I think in that ask is also, what does this mean for me, for my career, and where do I draw the line? Where do I push? Where do I stand up for what I believe is right for my organization, even if it means trade-offs? And that's something that is really tough, but it's also what defines the very best CPOs, is making the hard choices, but doing it with integrity, making good ethical choices, and then being able to bring that back to the business as a business outcome that drives trust with employees.
It's so hard to bear all that weight and show up and do all the things.
But this is why you have to have good partners, you have to have new technologies, you have to be able to have the time and space to get to good decisions.
The other thing I would add to Cara's great points is, I think one of the hard things about as Chief People Officer right now when making really innovative, courageous decisions around healthcare is fundamentally the vendors, the partners that you're thinking about are so far in front, right? That you just, kind of like, how do I even do this without having like a PhD in like public health? Like, I don't know how to think about this, right? Like fundamentally, I believe in outcomes-based, as any good business person thinks about it, right? And the healthcare system is so far behind. And so then you sort of think, well, is it the right thing to step outside what we know and to go with this instead? And how do I bring my finance partners along? What's been really interesting for me has been, even when I think we've been able to tell a really compelling potential cost saving story, the sense of apprehension of risk from my CFOs, from my VPs of FP&A has been actually remarkably high. And so the other imperative to have really expert partners who are thinking about this bleeding edge is to really guide through these decisions, because the edge of healthcare is exciting, but it's at the edge of this lumbering national system that is going to take decades, unfortunately, in my view.
So we were just in Toronto for a Modern People Leader event, and one of the details and circumstances, the timing didn't work out, but one of the people leaders based in Toronto recommended Nava as like one of our partners for the event, and her feedback was like, it is so hard to try to figure, for our US-based employees, it's so hard to figure that out. Just having a partner that can give you all the answers and a tech stack behind it and, all the things is so huge. And so I just wanted to double down on the partnership point. Just a central part of our mission at the Modern People Leader is that whether it's an episode you're listening to or an event that you attend, everyone leaves with an actionable thing, something they can take to their CHRO, their CEO, and like pitch them on like a new, better way. So the last thing that we're gonna cover is like a rapid fire type of question. What's one thing that our audience should do differently going into their jobs tomorrow or next week? What's one thing that all people leaders should be doing differently in the context of what we've talked about? Cara, I'll pick on you.
Yeah, I think it's about educating, and any amount of time you can carve out to understand what good looks like potentially in this future that we have. And I just spend time, I like Perplexity now. It's like, give me the top 5 most innovative healthcare solutions that you've seen in the last 3 months. And part of that is just having a general awareness, but part of it is also understanding where things are evolving. And I had not even seen this, first medical breakthrough with AI, but that is the promise literally of the next 5 years, is that our world will be changing because of these things. And I think it's not a moment in time like it used to be where you look at benefits. Again, I was always late, so it was always July for me. Now benefits is such a key part of our job. It's like this education cycle that needs to happen like first half of the year, and understanding that.
Yeah, I think for me, and this advice is not for the people who are leading from the front, but who are nervously in the middle or the back. Yeah. I was thinking coming into this conversation that one of the hardest things for chief people officers and folks on the people team is, historically, even in the face of tremendous challenge such as COVID and so on, fundamentally it was about figuring out what the big answer was and then bringing the organization through that change. And I think about, there are all these hard changes, and great people leaders and great people teams are constantly bringing organizations through change, but it's always been, there's an answer that you orient on. And we are now in a world where there will never be the answer. The answer will keep changing every month. And that was a kind of a big aha for me, because I think it crystallized for me what's actually felt really uncomfortable for me. Yeah. I've always I'm going to crush the answer, and then we're just going to execute on the answer. And now it's like the answer changes every single month. But if you can reorient in that way, I think it is actually very freeing, because it makes you realize the reason why you've been anxious is that you keep reaching for an answer that doesn't exist. And so if you allow yourself to say the answer for right now, and you come back to it in a month, because the landscape's going to change. The product velocity, as you all know, is insane. And things that the products couldn't do a month ago, they can now do 10x as well. That type of iteration, I think, is increasingly going to be a hallmark of any strong people team. And it's not, I actually think, in the DNA of many of ours right now.
Yeah, and my advice would be tap into your community, tap into your partners. We talked about it. The old playbook's broken. There's no map for where we're going, but I do believe if you make the most of the space like today where we're together and we have experts, amongst us, like talk to them, continue these conversations, because I guarantee if we all work together, the destination, wherever it is that we're headed, is going to look a lot better, not just from an employee experience, but our individual livelihoods and, healthcare. So take advantage of what we have. Shout out to the Nava team. Brandon, thanks again for inviting me to do this. This is so much fun. Cara, Jevan, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the rest of a great day with y'all.
Thank you,